All right. Let's, I think you're going to be victimized. I'm going to be presenting to you for about 2 hours. And one of the rules of my road is, particularly since I happen to know a couple of you, is that I would like you to interrupt with questions. Although I have a linear slide, it turns out just like living our lives, we may live it linearly, but we make sense out of it as we go along in any kind of way that we can possibly make some sense out of it. So I'm willing to jump around in the presentation because the thing I want to do is, I don't know what you don't know. I had a chance to scan just some of your background, some of your present work. And I know one thing, that since I don't know what you don't know, I also don't know what you know. And I know for sure that collectively, on this topic, all of you know a lot more than I do. So I'm going to try to fill in a couple of niches and stretch and stimulate. So I'd like to have it be free-flowing and filled with questions. What I'm really interested in doing today is to tell you something about the Fowler Center, tell you something about what's going on in sustainability at the Weatherhead School, and in this area of Northeast Ohio, and then throw it into the kind of big picture and some practical problems and situations that we're facing with today. There is some science, probably a great deal of science behind the idea of sustainability. And too many times I find that people get emotional about sustainability in one extreme way or another. And so I thought what I would do is I would start just by asking you, how many people think the planet is getting warmer compared to a few centuries ago? Okay, most people, which is just where we are. How many people who think it's getting warmer think that human beings are actually causing it? Causing part of it. I'll take part of it. That's a very good clarification. We're contributing to it, okay? All right. So that tells me then that if I can make a jump, that there's a possibility in other areas and topics around sustainability that we would also think that perhaps are really happening, like eutrophication in the oceans and dead spots and endocrine disruptors and things like that we could be causing some of that. So I'm just trying to get some measure of what's going on. The next question I want to ask is, how many of you have manufacturing background so that you can appreciate some principles of lean? So you've discussed, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to try to stay in those kinds of domains. The only reason I asked the climate question is because it's sort of my own quick thermometer, since it's the thing that's being publicized so much. But I also think it's a symptom, and I also think the way we react to it is symptomatic. So understanding that, I can understand and gauge then how you might react to some of the other things that we would talk about. So I noticed that there are a lot of academics in this group. That's good or bad, whatever. So yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm asking that because I'm looking for empathy. And the next thing is, in talking about the Fowler Center, there's an interesting history on how we've gotten to where we are and where we expect to be going from here. But I think before doing that, I want to make sure that I do this right. First, do I point this somewhere? Okay. There it is. Since we're close to Easter, I'm just wondering, what do you see here?
A rabbit duck.
See, that's the trouble with academics. I said to Linda, this wasn't going to work. The idea is that if you were more naive, that I was hoping to be able to influence you to see only the rabbit and talk about paradigm shifting, because I think at the root of the whole thing today, I want to be able to talk about paradigm shifting and what I think is really needed. And I'm sure that most of you are all aware of that. So that's the first failure. The Fowler Center for Sustainable Value actually got started just after, in its roots, its very, very deep roots, right after 9/11. There was intended to be a scheduled meeting with David Cooper Ryder and Anders Ferguson and some others. 9/11 happened, and they were very fearful about it being canceled. But out of that, they created a meeting on spirit and business. Out of that became business as an agent of world benefit. Out of that grew things like the UN Global Compact and the whole initiative and methodology that David Cooper Ryder has used in terms of appreciative inquiry applied to business as an agent of world benefit. The Fowler Center became named as the Fowler Center rather than the BAWB because of Chuck and his wife made a contribution, a significant contribution, Chuck Fowler and his wife. And Chuck Fowler is the president and CEO of Fairmont Minerals here in Northeast Ohio. So based on that, they created two things. One is the Fowler Chair for Sustainable Value. So there's a faculty chair, and we're still searching. For anybody who might be interested in applying for that position. And they also got an executive director out of it. And what we have now is a rather extensive emerging network with David Cooper Ryder as a faculty advisor, and of course, close to David is Ron Fry. And then Chris Laszlo is going to come in the middle of the summer, and he's going to become a full-time faculty member and also then an advisor to the Fowler Center, and we've already done some collaborative work. And then Emily Drew, Aaron Christmas, Linda Robeson. Aaron and Linda are both here over to my, just where I'm pointing, and during the summer we're going to have some full-time interns working with us. I don't really think, until we can fund it, I don't want to grow more than what we have. But the idea is, with this diagram, I'm just showing you the groups of organizations. Some are NGOs, and some are educational institutions. I might point out a couple of things that are where we're trying to do some strength building. There's a Northeast Ohio biomimicry group, and we've been working with Janine Banyas's Biomimicry Guild, which is located in Montana, and with the help of E4S and the Biomimicry Northeastern Ohio group, we seem to have a commitment that hasn't gone public yet, where the Biomimicry Guild is going to locate their beta site in Northeast Ohio, which I think is really important from a long-range strategic view. It'll bring a bunch of ideas to Northeast Ohio, and eventually businesses probably will come from those ideas, and they'll actually be applying the 9 laws of nature in creating their businesses. We've been invited to work with the Med Center CEO, who's the treasurer of CASE, to begin to redesign the power plant and how we distribute heat and energy across the campus, and we'll be doing that in collaboration with the Rocky Mountain Institute. So our idea is to begin to strengthen a lot of local relationships and then to expand that more or less along the same lines as David Cooper Ryder had been doing in an earlier phase of what is now the Fowler Center. There's a Cleveland 2019 initiative going on, which I think people know about, and we're fairly active, not only in the design phase of that with Emily Drew, but I've been working a lot in terms of curriculum development and hoping to draw Cleveland into the Society of Organization Education Partnership with the Cloud Institute. one of the things that I think we can do as a center is to influence the curriculum in the Weatherhead School of Management, and we're actively doing that. Erin and Emily and I have been talking to various faculty members and looking how to integrate sustainability right into the curriculum for the Weatherhead School. We're also trying to influence the curriculum and the impact of sustainability across the campus, and that links up with what I was talking about in terms of Cleveland 2019 and the Soul Ed partnership, because of the importance of addressing paradigms while people are in their learning process, paradigms around sustainability. What I would like to see is that the Weatherhead School itself move from in the 30s ranking for the Beyond Great Pinstripes evaluation of sustainability in business schools to single digits. Low single digits are preferred. Right now, the university itself is rated as a B minus in the sustainability report card. I'd like to get us into the A category. And we've had some very good conversations at senior levels inside of Case Western that I think can bring that about. In the end, I'd like to see Case Western Reserve and Cleveland become a destination point, not only for academics, for people, but for businesses to locate here, because they will recognize that this is a healthy, a very healthy place to be. And I want to come back to healthy in a few minutes. I'm not sure yet how to do this. I'm not. Okay. Where do I point to make it happen? I'm sorry. Oh, there it is. Did it. There's 3 definitions of sustainability that we've put up here. One is by the Brundtland Commission, one is by John Ehrenfeld, one is by Bill McDonough. And I just want to point out a couple of things on each of those. This idea of needs, that meets the needs of the present and allows future generations to have the ability to meet their own needs in the future. Needs change, and although we can think of Maslow's hierarchy and what needs mean, we're pretty much marketed to believe that some of our needs require us to have VCRs, fast cars, and a lot of airplane travel. And I'm not sure that when we lock ourselves into this idea of needs and sustainable development, I'm not sure what that all means. It seems like a very compromised statement. The sustainability is the possibility that humans and other life will flourish on Earth forever. It is really not that everything will flourish forever. It's really about the fact that everything will be given the opportunity to flourish forever, and that nature will reach some sort of equilibrium. And sustainability is a strategy for loving all children of all species for all time. It suggests this idea that the biosphere is a very complex system, and that what we're really looking for is harmony, and again, the opportunity so that there's some balance. I'm a big fan of just thinking of sustainability as achieving harmony with the biosphere. One of the things that happens in business as an agent of world benefit is that you're looking to create systems that are healthy. If you have healthy human systems, you have healthy human businesses. And if you have healthy human businesses, you end up with healthy communities. But none of that can happen unless you have an engagement with the biosphere that is also healthy. When I think of trying to create health and the work that, for example, I used to do at Ford Motor Company and Plug Power, I think that we need to create, in order for health to emerge, we need to have a truthful environment. People really have a desire to want to grow professionally and personally, and they should be given that opportunity to do that so that their work in a way complements their personal life, so that they develop as whole people. And that means to throw out the idea that I can't be the same at home as I am at work, or I can't be the same at work as I am at home. I think that that's a dysfunctional idea. Open to community formation. People want to belong to communities that are also healthy and health-giving. And beyond all that, we need to have a sustainable, in order to sustain this, you need an inspirational vision. And if you if you can bring all 4 factors to play, I think that you could actually have very high-performing organizations and a lot of success. So in order to understand what a sound inspirational vision would be like, we really need to look at our paradigms. And Peter Senge has a book out that's called The Necessary Revolution. I hope you've read it. On chapter 4, there's a couple of questions that I was going to bring up. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's got The Necessary Revolution, and in that he basically says that the paradigm that we seem to operate with the most as a society is that the economy is much more important than either society or nature. And when you read the headlines and you look at the priorities of the country and the things that are discussed in a lot of global forums, it does seem that we're very focused in practice and in actuality on making the topmost importance around the economy. What we should be doing is looking for ways to understand that the economy is embedded inside the society, and the society and the economy are both embedded inside of nature. That's a big paradigm shift. And how do you move from here to there, and how do you become successful in the process of transitioning in moving from one paradigm to another? I think that that's where people think it's costly. And there's 3 things that really happen, I think. The first is that in moving, it's going to cost. The second is that in moving, that no one person is going to be identified with the success factor. And the third thing in moving is that it's a long time. And my belief is to be successful to do this, we've got to adopt ideas similar to those that the great cathedral builders used when they laid the foundation for the cathedral in the 12th and 13th century. The likelihood of them seeing it completed was really very small. But they were inspired about the completion, and they understood that if they didn't lay the blocks correctly, that the cathedral itself would be flawed, and it would not be successful. I think when you think of egos and time constants, we live in a quarter-by-quarter world, we live in an annual report world, and we live in a Jack Welch kind of world where I need to be identified with the success. So that's what I'm worried about with the ego. So we've got to work on egos and time constants in the way we discuss those as we bring up the following generations, because until we address that problem, I think we're going to have difficulty moving away from the problems moving away from the idea that the economy is the most important thing and the game is to make more and more profits. Okay, with that, I had mentioned Cleveland 2019. So Cleveland 2019 is basically aimed at concluding in the year 2019 a major effort to put a green city by a blue lake, which was also in the time frame of the burning of the Cuyahoga River, which I guess was burning a number of years even before that at different times. But the celebrated date will be 50 years in 2019. So that's why that was chosen. And what they've done is they've put together this description where they're talking about doing exactly that, subordinating the economy to society, subordinating society and the economy to the environment. And what they've done is they've got some practical outcomes in terms of what they're going to see as results, and then they have a proper set of measurables to indicate whether those changes are or are not in effect. There was a forum in August in 2009. There'll be a forum again in 2010 to check in on all the various, yes?
When you're done with that, I'd like
Check in on the committees that were part of that to see what kind of progress they've made year over year and to reinvigorate all of us to keep on that journey. Yes?
just to let you know, I'm Dave Sherman, so I've been partnering with David Kugelreiter, and he brought us in to do that work.
Right.
So that's,
Well, then if you're,
Sustainable Value Partners is the one that's working.
yeah, Dave, in fact, I happen to have your description of this slide right here, because I'm also an inveterate plagiarist, okay? So I will say to you, I added one little thing to that, and that's species diversification
Great.
down in the corner, because the rest of it seems so businesslike that I decided to make that little modification.
Sounds good.
Okay? But I don't know who's going to count the species, but somebody should, right? Greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gases. Are there other questions about this? Thank you very much, Dave. Good work. Like it.
Are these slides available?
Yeah, they're going to be on the Fowler website. And depending on your reaction to them, they'll be in one state of array or disarray. No. Okay, so there's the application of trying to change the paradigm and taking a 10-year view of that to do it. And in fact, I think there were over 700 people involved in the Cleveland 2019 meeting. There are something like 23 or 24 committees. About 19 of those, I think, are really going hard. And I don't know how many people will be in the fall meeting in September, but I expect the number will be as large, if not larger. Okay. So that's the David Cooper Ryder, the Fowler Center, the Weatherhead School of Management being involved in a local effort over a long period of time. And in fact, this model is attracting a lot of attention across the country, and people are beginning to make a lot of inquiries about it. I was just in a meeting with David Orr and the EPA down at Oberlin College on Wednesday, and the EPA has been very deeply involved in this as a participant and is very interested in figuring out how to replicate this process in other cities and other regions of the country. I asked about global warming, and I thought just for a second it would be good to take a look. I keep looking at that one, so I'll do this one. If this starts about 1920, and there's a reason why I want to do this for a second. This starts at 1920 and goes all the way to 2010. Those data right there are the end of 2009, and we tried to update this chart yesterday because this is kept up on a monthly basis by NASA. And what it really says is, if you can look at it simply, it says the average mean global temperature, land ocean temperature, is gradually heating up, which makes it go from looking like blue to looking like red. So there's something going on with the climate. That's for sure. And it looks like if you take a look at the average mean temperature, it's actually moving up about half a degree to 0.6 of a degree centigrade. These are pretty realistic data. But the thing that doesn't get discussed and should get discussed is what's happening at the poles. So if you take a look at 2005, 2007, 2009, the red, like where you don't want to put your hand, is all around the polar areas. And in fact, it's an indication that at and near the polar regions, the heating is about 3 or 4 degrees centigrade. Now, it's not discussed when you think of mean temperatures, but this is pretty important because even though Washington, D.C. may have had a lot of snowstorms, we've just entered, by the way, an El Nino period. Even though Washington, D.C. is here and not experiencing those kinds of temperatures, the planet itself is getting warmer, but it's not getting warmer in a linear fashion across the planet. It's getting warmer in specific areas. And the reason that is, by the way, just very quickly, there's a thing called the Hadley cell that dumps heat from the equator up onto into the polar regions. So that's important, and I'll explain to you, because we think that if we've added CO2 added as a gas, water is a greenhouse gas. It's the most abundant in the atmosphere, as you would expect, and CO2 is in there in parts per million level, somewhere around 388 to 390 right now. You add CO2, the temperature goes up in the poles, And what you do is you release methane, and methane is about 25 times more active as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is 20 times more reactive as a greenhouse gas than water vapor. Yes, sir.
Could you comment just for, when we listen to sound bites about folks attacking the underlying data for global warming, how do you feel about that? If we look at, we put up a chart like that, and yet in the public discussion,
Yeah, it's a.
sometimes that's really discounted. So I wanted to see what you thought about that.
Okay, can I come back to that in just a second? Okay, so the key really is, I'm saying that, and I've got that question. The key is that you've got a reinforcing loop. More CO2 causes more temperature causes more methane compounds the problem, and your polar ice begins to melt because the temperature there is so much more sensitive to it. Okay.
Roger,
Yes.
what's the mechanism that generates the release of methane in the polar?
Okay. Good. Really quick. The mechanism of this is, and there's a reason why I want to go through this just as carefully as I can. The mechanism is that the methane itself is trapped in what's called hydrates, which is basically, think of a pyramid, and inside the pyramid of water, at each corner there's a water molecule. Inside it is a methane molecule, but it's ice. So when that melts, it releases the methane as well as the ice turning into water. So that's what happens. Now, the controversy over the data. There have been a lot of real careful looks at that discussion, one of which, and I don't have it off the top of my head, it was a woman from Canada who analyzed the idea that these data are wrong. The reason I'm using NASA and NOAA data is since 1979, we've been actually able to look at these temperatures from outer space. There's no fudging. They're there. So that's the first. The second thing is that the data back to about 1880 have been all back calibrated against standards, so the temperatures are pretty well known. Temperatures. The relationship between the carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gases, whether it's oxides of nitrogen or carbon dioxide or methane, very complicated to figure that out. It's a big systems dynamics issue, a big modeling issue. So there's a lot of corrections that, taken out of context, makes the stuff from, I think it was Leeds College in England, makes it look like they were fudging the data. And in fact, this statement, if you go through, I forget how many pages of stuff there is, and I'll give you my card, I'll give you that reference, I'll give everybody that reference, I'll find the reference. Linda, could you make a note of that I need to give the reference on the technical refutation against that. It's odd that those data would have been put into controversy just before the Copenhagen meeting. I mean, I don't really believe in circumstances. It's odd also that that about 11 computer systems where climate modeling was going on were all being hacked at about the same time. And they got into the system, and I believe it was at Leeds College. Now, I am in no way a conspiracy guy. I'm just saying I'm a realistic guy that says there's too much coincidence going on here. And I'll come back to this discussion in a second. Yes?
Well, I guess what I would say is that, like in many areas, the academic discussion is much different than the public discussion. And the public discussion, in many places, is, if you actually look at it, is the academic one is totally over here, and the one in the public domain is over here. And so if you actually read the academic papers and all that, you get a much different view. And they use this word trick.
Trick. I was going to...
It actually has a technical term in how you make corrections to large pieces of data, again, taken out of context.
Yeah.
So, so from our backgrounds, if you actually go back and look at the stuff, there's no, I mean, you might, which percentage is by name could be a little bit, unknown, there's some uncertainty there, but the basics that are in the public discussion are, it's very obvious. You have to go back and
and I was going to make the same comment. Trick is in the refutation that the issue a word around the word trick. Some of my very best friends are climate scientists, and there is no way that they don't understand, that they recognize two things. The climate is heating up, and we're contributing to some of it, which I thought was a good point earlier, that it's not clear just how much we're contributing, but it's quite clear we're contributing to some of it. And the number seems to be rock solid at least 60% of the global warming. Yes?
The last issue of The Economist had a really good article in it about how to start thinking about climate, given the uncertainty and acting. And the current issue of Time talks about some of these other things that are going on. And so I think if you look in the right places, even in the non-academic area, you can start painting a decent picture. If you go to the credible sources, I think one of the challenges we have is that the real news is getting cut out a lot. The people that need to report it are getting fired. And so most of what you've got are blogs and people that have certain opinions and all of that. So it's really difficult for any of us to kind of make sense of it. So I've had to spend 10 years studying this stuff to get any sense of it.
So I wanted to labor with this climate thing. My purpose for doing this is that if we have this much discussion over climate, what do we do with nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, the oxygen cycle, the carbon cycle, and so forth, which are even far less tangible unless you happen to be out there, but they're absolutely just as critical. We can adapt, and this is not something I necessarily say, we can adapt to climate change. It's going to be painful. We're going to have food problems. We can go down all the list of apocalyptic kind of thinking about what happens with climate change. Some of the other things we can't adapt to. For example, if we have too much, if we disrupt the nitrogen cycle like we're continuing to do, we end up having endocrine disruptors, and endocrine disruptors do all kinds of things to us that you can't adapt to. I mean, it's, you know, either mutate or you die. I mean, so if we're having this much trouble here, I'm saying that the other fronts in sustainability are even less concrete to the non-technical people. One of the reasons why I want to work on the Fowler Center to change the curriculum is to bring in more and more technical content. Because if we want really good business people, they need to understand how to take data apart and convert that into a strategy and an action plan that's implementable and explainable to their shareholders, to themselves, to their employees, to their communities. Because it's going to be necessary for business people, I believe, to be a lot more grounded in some of the fundamental technology than I think we are today in any of our business schools. Yes, sir. Here, yeah.
It seems to me that you don't even do this, you even technically accomplish it. If you went back 3 or 4 slides where you had the definition of sustainability, I think that's part of our problem as we think about this, because we ground it in a hug all the critters mentality, right? And so I don't look at it as saying I want all species to survive, right? I mean, the reason we have Walter Reed hospitals is because this guy went down in the 1900s to Cuba and killed a species, right? That was a species of mosquito that was wiping out thousands of people, right? So you go, no, I don't want all species to survive, and there's a human-centric nature to the human race, right? So it seems to me that the better grounding of the argument is to say, how do we make our economy work better? How do we make the environment work better for us as a species? And so that to me is and especially situating in a business school, seems like a better starting point to say, look, we can screw this thing up, and that will screw up the economy, it will screw up your jobs, it will screw up communities and whatever. We don't want to do that. But it's not about
Well, I think that's an interesting and good point, and it needs to be put in the context of we're losing something like 10,000 species a year on the planet right now. And not all of those are Aedes mosquitoes or Anopheles mosquitoes and things that are in some way torturing our existence. Drawing the boundary between what should be here and what shouldn't be here, I think is sort of beyond the scope of our capabilities today. And within certain guidelines, it would seem to me that we are overdoing it in our species extinction rate today.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm just saying in terms of, when we get into these debates about, you know, we end up polarizing our discussion, right? Because we start from a philosophical standpoint, right? And I think if you ground it in a self-interest standpoint, it says, look, you know, we want the human species to survive, we want the people to continue to grow their economy, you know, have jobs, be able to educate their kids, do all this stuff. And some of the stuff we're doing is counterproductive to that, or there are better, more efficient ways, right? It's sort of the lean manufacturing argument of let's eliminate waste versus the let's love all critters argument. I just think it is an argument. You get more people to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Whether you believe, I mean, whether you say, well, philosophically, wherever you come from doesn't matter. If you get more people to jump on the bandwagon and say, all right, you know, let's all go buy hybrid cars or something, right? Then you know,
Okay.
if you move the argument, if you move the starting point of your discussion or the starting point of the center, it seems like you have a better
Sure.
chance of being inclusive.
Well, let's pick this up toward the end, because there's some other things. Yes.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I want to just throw in an anecdote that happened when the Walmart executive group went away for 2 days and asked that question. Lee Scott, who was the CEO at the time, said, he asked Conservation International, you know, there was this small thing that looked like a rat on the endangered species list, and we couldn't build a supercenter. Why should we care? And one of the scientists there stumbled, he couldn't say much, but the head of Conservation International, who works with he basically was working with Rob Walton, and that's what started this whole thing. And he works with a lot of CEOs and the like. And basically he said, imagine, you know, take a look at an airplane wing, and you're flying in the airplane, and one rivet comes out. Would you worry? Probably not. What about 2 that come out? Do you worry then? Maybe not. What about 3? At what point does the whole thing fall apart? And what he said is we're basically doing a grand experiment right now in affecting this environment. So we don't know where the tolerance level is, and that's really what the situation is. And so it's not philosophical. And everybody in that room, senior executives who had no grounding in this, they all got it immediately. And that actually helped launch them on the path they've been on. And they're not doing it for charity, they're doing it for business reasons. But the challenge is that business executives don't have the context and the understanding of the larger environment that they're operating in, that in fact society is a subset of the natural environment and business is a subset of society. You need a healthy beach. So that's where they came out.
Okay, one more comment, then we're going to go on. Yeah.
Okay, this just kind of plays in with what Julie's saying. There's a group, and I don't know if you've heard of them, they're out of the UK, they're called Cape Farewell. It's a not-for-profit organization. And they started this organization to address the problem that all the environmental statistics, all the environmental graphs that are telling us all these horrible things are going to happen, we're going to lose these species, et cetera. What they found was that people were not changing behaviors. And so no matter how many graphs and charts and whatever telling people that this is going to happen, they weren't changing behaviors. So issue with the environment is that people, it's so overwhelming that people just close down. And so I think your challenge with sustainability has to take that into account.
Yeah, and I think it's also our challenge. There's two things that I'd say about that. I haven't drawn into this conversation catastrophe. I've used the word apocalypse, but I wasn't talking necessarily about where I'm coming from. I'm just simply saying that if we're going to talk about this, we need to look at it in a kind of a comprehensive way and know what the other kinds of arguments are. I want to go back. We may have skipped over it. The title of this talk is Finding Our Chon. Now, I know you're all academics. A lot of you are academics. And in this particular case, does anyone know what that means? Okay, well, I was curious that no one reacted to that as a title. Maybe we can find out. By the way, this is the kind of thing that's forecasted, and I put this up here because, again, it has to do with the finishing on the climate work. This has to do with what can happen at various parts per million estimated from the models. And the right-hand side are really business impacts, so that when you're looking at this, when you have when you have a chance to look at this, you want to take a look up here and see at what level, for example, glaciers disappear. It looks like 2 degrees is the onset of that, and of course, if you go up to Glacier National Park, you can see that. So something is happening. I think we're contributing to it, and from a business perspective, we need to have these things in our minds as we develop our longer-term strategies. So I worked for Ford Motor Company for 30 years, and we used to have to put business plans together every year, whether we were at the plant level or many plant level or the design level and so forth. And John knows this very well. 4 questions. Where are you? Where do you want to be? How do you want to get there? And why do you want to go there? And coming back to the question of what are we doing in immobilizing people with language, why you want to go there over many generations of hardship is hardly inspirational. So I just want to, in terms of the language is a big deal. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do something that I didn't know that I would do at this point or not. But, yeah.
I should have added, the way they've attempted to deal with the language problem is they've taken artists, educators, et cetera, so they'll take them to the Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
They'll paint the problems, and they'll, so they do a whole different
Right.
way of looking at
Right.
the environmental devastation.
Yeah, so but again, what I wanted to do is I wanted to jump to something that I just had in reserve, and it really gets at the problem that you're talking about in a different kind of way. If you can follow this chart, what I want to do is, I don't know where everybody can see it, but I'll try to, here's the way things used to be. What? No. What does non-recursive? Okay. What? The idea here is that we started out in a pretty sustainable place. Forgetting all the detail in here, we did a lot of things that once we learned how to do things better, allegedly, we got to ignorant, but we caused some problems, but we were ignorant of consequences, and we just move upstream. Then there became a period of awareness and denial. What happened in London in the early coal-fired smog days in London and in California. Then we began to really see how big the problems were, and this immobilization set in, hopelessness and despair. And one of the problems I have with the books about sustainability, in 1965, there were 5 books by an ISBN count on the environment published that year or had some idea. In 2005, there were 1,520. And that number jumped. I'm sorry, I did it the wrong way. 1,250 books, ISBN numbers, had something to do with the environment and sustainability. And almost every book was a gloom and doom book. Jared Diamond, Collapse. You go right down the title. So this is really important. How do we move people to hopefulness and action? And that's key. If we don't know how to market these kinds of problems and present these problems without emphasizing how dramatically awful they are, if I could show you slides that all of us have seen. You know, it's everything from the polar bear to the garbage patch in the Pacific to the 250 dying spots in the ocean and the coral and all of that stuff. That doesn't do us any good. So we need to know that, but at the same time be able to create hopefulness and action. I think that one of the ways to do that is to take advantage of the computer systems and begin to form a sense of awareness about the entire biosphere and populations. And what are we doing that are successful? The success stories. One of the things that the Fowler Center does is collect stories in the library that are about hopefulness and action. And we need to figure out how to tell ourselves that, okay, we've gotten ourselves into this fix, but don't deny that the fix is there. Don't play it up so that it has to be solved in a quarter or a year. And begin to move in a way so that we have a real sense of global intimacy, and we can then promote the well-being of future generations and get ourselves into a more sustainable world. Now that's a 2-minute summary of about a half an hour, one slide at a time loop discussion. But I just want to give you the kind of context. And moving from here to here, we got to here. In other words, we've got from the pre-Holocene and Holocene period to about now in about 12,000 years. And I don't know how we can expect to get out of it in 10 years or 20 years. In a lot of cases, this is a multi-generational problem that we've got to work on in order to get over here. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And I think it's pretty inspirational if we have an idea of where we're really headed. Yes?
Yeah, it's a formidable problem, like the whole time question. But another element of the problem is global intimacy is unprecedented and unproven. And I have to ask myself the question, is it possible, conceivable, and would it actually produce the solution?
Well, let's look at it another way. I'm sure that if we don't have it, we're going to have a lot more problems. I don't know whether we can get it or not. But let's just ask, here's the question that I would ask you is, where does your personalization radius stop and your objectification radius begin? What do you personalize in the world? Your family? Your nearest neighbor, maybe? Maybe somebody at work? But how far does that extend? And what I'm after here is not only extending it to people around the world, but also to, not in a tree-hugging sense. I want to get away from that because that's a very pejorative kind of terminology. But the fact is, put our arms around the biosphere in a way that we know that we're really intimately codependent. And that maybe we don't know whether it's good or bad for us, but we suspect, since this system of nature is very intricate and redundant in many cases, that it's probably better that these other species are doing pretty well than to have them not doing pretty well, because it won't be long until something bad will happen to us. But this idea of personalization and this idea of objectification, this objectification ability that we have, I think is down deep in a paradigm, is a real problem. And meetings like this, approaches like that David Cooper Ryder and Ron Fry use are very important, and others are using in order to build a better understanding of all the other life on the planet, starting with human beings. Okay? Question? Yes?
A comment. I go back to Sengi's diagram here, and rather than seeing it as concentric circles, I see it more as interlocking with arrows. And what's missing in the argument, I believe, is the concept of stewardship. We get involved in the outer ring on the environment, and then that begins to permeate the entire discussion about sustainability. And to me, sustainability has to envelop the entire society, from our business organizations to our not-for-profit organizations, the way we do things in society, as well as the environment. And as the one paper from the Boston Consulting Group said, if we get locked into the green silo, we lose the argument as to what we're really after in the way of sustainability. And I think we have to come back to the idea of the stewardship, and that each of us have an obligation to leave, whether it's the environment, the company, the organization, the city, better than it was when we came there. And until we instill that in our culture, we're going to get mired down into an argument about what species stay, what species don't stay. But we have to make it so that it cuts across all areas of our society. That starts with Wall Street. We have this quarter-to-quarter mentality, month-to-month mentality, and until we can get away from that, that drives our economic system. And then consequently, you can't look longer term. But this idea of sustainability and the center, I think, on sustainability has to focus on each of these three interlocking, interconnected segments if we're going to give it legs long term.
Sure. Okay, any other? Yes.
I'm stuck on the ignorance of consequences in manufacturing businesses, for example. You have a company that is creating something, they use chemicals, certain processes, and then years later they find out that that was damaging the environment. And sometimes those companies are asked to pay for the damages that they caused. Is that fair? Who pays for environmental damage, especially when you didn't even know that you were creating harm?
Well, I don't know how to do the legal thing, but the ignorance of consequences that I intended here was, this is back with the Mayans and the Stonehenge people and so forth, and the Easter Island people. Today, that's a legal question. I have no idea whether that's right or wrong, but we all pay.
Theoretically,
Yeah,
who picks up the tab for it? I mean, that's very important to business.
sure.
If you want business to be involved in improving the environment, they have to pay attention to the bottom line.
Sure.
But in Kathy, you can't get a piece of property financed unless the damage on the property is something about. Right. So our financial system has kind of put out a standard that says, if that property is damaged by whatever, that it has to.
That's not a financial decision. I mean, that's a legal decision. It's been imposed on the financial environment. But the question, what's the right question? The answer is we all pay for it.
Right.
Either as customers or as taxpayers, we all pay for it.
We all pay for it, right.
Whether we do it or we don't do it, we still pay for it.
Yep. And we can also pay for it if we don't fix it in health ways that are unseen and unknown. Okay,
But does society have an obligation to help the businesses be more environmentally responsible?
well, I have a very simple and trivial metaphor. A lot of students, when they were in 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th grade, decided that they were going to take the really easy courses, not math, not calculus and so forth, not science and geology and biology, and they ended up not being able to go to college. Now, they made a choice. And some of those are going to fill the niche of people who aren't college educated. I feel the same problem often happens to businesses. Businesses can claim and I've been in business for 38, 39 years, I have heard many discussions around the so-called ignorance question, and I think that the opportunity to learn, they chose not to take it. And so I'm not as forgiving of businesses saying, well, I didn't know I dumped chromium, or I didn't know, and so forth and so on. They can constructively engage in that and help to repair it, or they can take the penalty. And if they're constructive about it, I usually find that there's a lot of community to help them do it. It's when they lobby against it and spend, right now we have the GE thing, for example, in the Hudson River that's going on. And we have eco-imagination happening in GE, and at the same time they've been spending millions of dollars fighting the cleanup of the Hudson River for PCBs. Why don't they just clean it up? Because they've made a financial decision that it's better to delay and use future capital, and the small chance that they might be able to not have to do it as part of their campaign. And they may not have known that they did it at the time, but they can afford to clean it up.
Well, that's the key. They can afford it. What about some companies, especially privately held, they can't afford that. And they were not, it wasn't a choice. They didn't know that they were causing harm.
And then I would say, and another way of saying it is, that they shouldn't have been in business in the first place.
Well, but science progresses. I mean, we learn new things. We learn certain things cause damage that we didn't know 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'm just saying, because we're learning more, is responsible for when we didn't know.
Can I just,
Roger, that's Imelt's job you're talking about.
That's what?
That's Jeff Imelt's job.
Yeah.
If he makes the decision and he puts the money there, earnings per share go down, he's out.
Mhm.
So that's, you look at the motivations behind this. It's a job issue for him. It's an employment issue. And whether you get back to the question, what's right and what's wrong, it comes down to an employment issue.
And I would say again that what he's doing
That's
is,
the short-term orientation we have, because he wants to stay in his job this quarter, this week.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's a paradigm issue that the economic issues outweigh the longer-term societal environmental issues. Yeah.
Let me just throw in a little bit of data here. Basically, we have externalized a lot of costs in the past. There's a huge trend with changing now, and even if you read the current issue of Time, they'll talk about it in chemicals, where in the past we assumed every chemical was safe until proven guilty. And that's shifted in Europe, it's going to shift other places. The leading companies today, there's actually a few of them that you can look at, are starting to understand how sustainability is going to be shaped in the future. And it's going to be higher standards that either will cost a lot more, but the leading ones are innovating to save money to get to the future. And so basically what I see happening is there's a lot of companies that will go extinct. The half-life of a Fortune 500 company has gone down consistently over the past period of time. The leading strategy article that was cited in the last 10 years is by David Teese, a professor at Berkeley, on a thing called dynamic capabilities. And it's about ability to sense changes in the broader business environment. And basically companies are not very good at it. Some Silicon Valley companies are better. It's going to be a failure of management if they don't see these trends and actually reposition for them and make money on the way. So the mindset that says there's a trade-off right now is a non-innovative mindset that will actually make them extinct. So my view is that if you look at it as a business executive today, these issues are becoming very real through legislation, through competitors, through your customers. And if you don't actually see what's going on, and we don't, because the landscape of business is fundamentally changing. When I was an MBA, the things they taught were not what we learned in the EDM program, but what we learned in the EDM program about the social forces and collective action and all of that is much more what the future of business is about. And most executives don't actually see those things happening at the fringes that will actually impact the way they do strategy. So there's a thing called non-market strategy, which more and more people are teaching. In fact, John Aram wrote the first book on that, or one of the early textbooks on it, but he didn't call it that. Now it's a Stanford guy who does. And if we don't get that calculus in the way we do business, we'll just be extinct by the ones that are doing it already. And we see the differentiation in our business from those leaders and the others, and we help senior executives sort of understand that and lead. And I can tell you the best run companies are really starting to look at this seriously. And the best CEOs are starting to step up. So that's just the world we're in.
Okay. I think this dilemma of legality and the implication, survivability, and so forth, it's pretty dynamic in the sense that companies will fail because society is learning, and we are beginning to see the consequences. And in fact, if you wanted to conform to the laws of nature, that you would only expect that to happen because there's another law that says survival of the fittest. And even if the rules change, we have to be prepared that businesses will, in fact, fail for reasons that it's unfortunate, but they will. One of the things that Peter talks about is, in terms of these questions, where are you, where you want to be, where do you want to go, so forth, how and so forth. One of the things that we need to do is to take a look at what the industrial age looks like and what the kind of the natural equivalent of it would be. The industrial age is based on the growth of fossil fuels. One of the questions would be, if we didn't have fossil fuels, what would we have done differently than we've done in order to keep evolving? Without the resources of fossil fuels, what would we do? Well, we would certainly have found a way to directly rely on sunlight. Global food production is going to become more and more local. If you confine yourself to a nature model, there's a lot of waste. In nature, there's no waste. In fact, waste becomes food. There's standardization in industrial settings, and there's diversity. Maximize income, it's maximize social well-being in order to build relationships, which is this idea of somehow or other beginning to build relationships with everything that's in the biosphere. Not an overnight issue, but somehow or other we've got to learn how to do that. So how do we guide ourselves and how do we think about our position relative to how nature does things? Janine Banyas of the Biomimicry Guild has basically derived 9 laws of nature, and it's morphed a little bit. You can go to her website under biomimicry. She's got books out. But basically she says, whoops, I did it the wrong way. Just a second. I'm a flawed natural being. Nature runs on sunlight. Nature uses only the energy that it needs. Well, actually, to the extent that it knows that it needs it, but of course it can exceed its limits and overblow a pond with algae or a petri dish with bacteria. Nature recycles everything. Nature demands local expertise. In other words, you have to be adapted to your environment. And you can go down through this. It's a different way of looking at design guidelines when you're thinking about a product. And what I want to do is I want to say that these laws can be applied successfully and successively over time to take a business from one that's of the old industrial age to one that is based solely on the 9 laws of nature and some implications within those. 6th century guy, Lao Tzu, basically said if people do not revere the law of nature, it will inexorably and adversely affect them. And it's kind of interesting that that's 600 years ago, that there was that much wisdom in what he was saying, and lots of other groups of peoples have come up with the same kind of conclusion in different forms. And although I talked about global warming, Arrhenius in 1898 was having a bad year with his wife, and he took his anger out by doing a lot of hard calculations, and he forecasted that carbon dioxide would cause global warming, and that if we kept on doing it. So that's an idea that's 110 or 12 years old, and we're still struggling with it. Yes. Oh,
The 9 laws, where do those come from?
Janine Banyas in biomimicry and the Biomimicry Guild, and she's just derived them as a biologist. She and her partner, over many years of looking at the world. I'm going to come back to that. Okay. And there's a set of references that come with this. I just put this up here because it speaks to the question of, can we make mistakes and come back and correct ourselves? It doesn't mean that necessarily. Nature is not particularly interested in an individual or a particular community. Rather, she seems to be indifferent. But what she's interested in doing is having the ability to sustain herself, just in general. So if you need a specific person or a specific species to make it, I don't think that nature really is concerned about that. And I speak of it that way just because I don't mean that there's some nature person that's sitting up there that's called Ms. Nature, and she's looking down. I'm just saying, if you look at what happens, she's not as interested in the particular as she is in the general.
I'm interested that you made her a she and not a he.
Well, I also think the promise in sustainability is going to start with women before it starts with men, because I think that if you think about Chon, women are a lot closer to nature than men are, just because of other reminders that they have that we don't.
I'm puzzled
Ruthie
about the
Bates,
term-
one.
One.
I'm puzzled by the term balance. If you look at the Earth, it shows signs of extreme imbalance rather than balance.
Yep.
You stand at the Grand Canyon and you think 0.5 degree of global warming, and that's not even rounding here in terms of some of the things that the Earth has experienced over its history. What does that mean, balance?
Sure. It means we don't understand the time constant that she has, because if we lose 90% of the species on the planet, it takes the planet about 10 million years to recover to the diversity that we currently enjoy. So our time constant and her time constant are really different. I'm going to come back to that. It's a very, very, very good point. I put underneath here that we can't sense it, but nature endures ice ages, volcanoes, all kinds of diversity experiments, the dinosaurs and so forth, mutations. There's an adversity stimulus response that goes on that allows experimentation, which is exactly what happens in an estuary, where a big storm comes through. There's all kinds of natural phenomena. In fact, there was a book written, it's probably 20 years old now, called Echo Homo. And it basically, the premise of that book is that humanity has evolved because nature has been pushing human beings into different circumstances, and has created situations where variability became an advantage. So walking upright, for example, or Cro-Magnons versus Neanderthals, the sorts that went on were actually presented by challenges that nature offered over time. Does that help? Just a thought. Okay. Okay, I wanted to. My original intent was to stop here and have a lot of questions about what went before, but it looks like we've done pretty well with the questioning along the way. But if there's something else that's niggling at you, this is sort of background to some practical applications and thinking. Okay. We cannot forget that a business, and even if it's an NGO enterprise in some way or another, that the quality of the service, controlling the cost, delivering what is the product, the service on time, making your commitments, and obviously, at least if you're an NGO, to be sustainable and balancing the budget. If you're a for-profit organization, you have to deliver a profit. Nothing I'm saying should keep us from doing that and being focused on that. The one thing I would say is if you get into the language of the triple bottom line, you need to use the social lens or the people lens and the planet lens. Use them in terms of focusing you so that you can in fact have a chance to create a high-performing organization that's in harmony, not in disharmony, and can actually produce a profit. Yes?
The thing that concerns me about models where we try to understand the future is, I think it was just a few years ago, we thought the ozone layer, the hole in the ozone layer was going to cause an ice age. I heard the other day, and maybe somebody else has heard this, that there's a dam in China that contains so much water that it's actually shifted the rotation of the Earth by 3 degrees. What if we thought the problem was CO2 and it was actually something else, and we set about to address the wrong problem? We have demonstrated over our history such an ability to do really well at fixing the wrong problem. And we could actually make things worse.
Sure.
Couldn't we?
Sure. I think that's always a danger of fixing the wrong problem. But it's also a danger not to be aware of the boiling frog problem. So I think that in one instance you have the issue of the boiling frog, and there's a clear and dramatic consequence. And the other is you have frogs jumping all over the place. So, you know, where's the balance? And trying to find it, it does come back to balance. It's just like trying to balance profit or meeting your budget with all the other constraints. You can't just simply select one thing and go. You got to do it in a measured way. And I think this may be for humanity right now a relatively thoughtful period that probably began in the middle 50s. And it may last for 50 more years until we finally get ourselves in motion to do something. Okay. Oh, yes.
I was just going to add, when you asked if there was anything that was on our minds, a while back in a setting very similar to this, in research evidence, I'm an academic, but I believe was a climatologist, basically summed up the argument on global warming as saying that we're looking at so small a time that when he, and again, from all of our efforts in quantitative analysis here, we realized that if we take a data series and look at 2 years and extrapolate the future, he said if you take a look at a long enough time frame, you can't conclude anything about global warming. And it will be beyond our lifetimes whether or not we go back to something that is normal on this multi-year, time frame, and then we actually go into a period of time where it's cold. And then so that was, I mean, it was very interesting because he said, look, I don't think anybody can make any claim, and he said anybody who does, he'll just refute it with that. The other thing I was going to ask you is there's been an awful lot of talk.
Oh, was that a question or a statement?
That was a statement.
Okay.
Because there is no, I mean, he convinced me that we're not going to know the answer for a long time. But being from Pennsylvania, I see that there's a lot of talk about Penn State and some of the academic articles that are going into some of the referee journals and how some may be kept out. Do you have any comment on that particular issue that's going on?
Actually, no. I'm not sure I understand what that controversy is. All I know is
Well,
that
there were some refereed articles in these journals on these types of issues that were being excluded by the editors.
and I only thought that the little bit that I do know about that is that that's usually done on a technical basis and usually done blind. So I'm not sure, there must have been something in the argument that didn't stay consistent with what the known science is. But I can't defend it, I don't know.
Well, not the end, the editing side. The referees may make some recommendations, the editor decision, but the editor says global warming is bunk, or I don't want to
Well, actually, if that were the case, then I would say if the person has a paper of merit, is that he submits it somewhere else. No one place can, you know. Yes.
Roger, I think there's sometimes a danger that we get caught up on climate control, warming, climate change, all those different things. We keep looking, if you will, at the result of what it is we're doing. I think there's an issue of sustainability that maybe in some ways is maybe even more concrete, and that is the rate at which we can consume the ability of this planet to actually, sort of provide a set of sources for us. And so one of the things that I would like to see more focused towards is an understanding of what is a reasonable level of consumption. Because I think in some ways, if we were actually able to consume less, and find ways to consume less, we would actually generate lesser harmful effects. And that, part of my problem is I think the debate in some ways is almost in the wrong place. And I know it's a tough debate because people never want to hear that they ought to be able to have less than they had yesterday.
Well, that comes back to an issue of what's the paradigm. We have a consumption paradigm rather than reduction of consumption paradigm that exists. We need to feed the economy. To the part of the other statement question you had, there's all kinds of debates about the load carrying capacity of the planet, but it seems like if everybody lived the way we do, it's 4, 6, 12. Those are the various numbers that come up in terms of how many planets you need for this population. I've stayed away from population discussions and lifestyle discussions. I'm really trying, because that's even more difficult than what I'm trying to do here.
Oh, no, I understand.
Okay.
I think that's why we have to have it, though, because at some point that does get to be the real issue.
Well, it does. It's again back to that question of needs. What do we think we need to have to do? And my belief is that you can have an awful lot of needs satisfied and wants satisfied if you do it with a biologically defined product. Part of the reading for this was around a finished goods manufacturing company where they wanted to make the most quality product with the least amount of input. In other words, it was an efficiency discussion, and they talked about raw materials, water, natural gas, and so forth going in, and looking at the waste stream, everything from water to air, and then down at the bottom it was liquid waste and solid waste. And then eventually they came with a mass efficiency of about 38%. And I don't know if you know, some of you know about lean manufacturing. That's basically a fairly good story, and it certainly has a well-known objective where you want, if you just make the left-hand side cost, whatever that is, it's like it's as though it's a good story. The idea that water comes out as a liquid waste, or if it comes out as a waste of an effluent type, why is it that that can't be used as food to go into something else? So why wouldn't we want to design, why wouldn't we want to design what's inside of here so that it could be, in fact, not waste, but food? And that goes back into the design of whatever it is the product is that you're trying to do. So the reason I wanted you to take a look at this is a fairly classic kind of good story about lean manufacturing. And if you look at, and lean businesses, if you look at the 10 laws of lean, there are 10 laws allegedly. Create a culture of continuous improvement, empower workers, meet and so forth, partner with suppliers, do it right the first time, eliminate waste, abolish local optimization, maximize flow, minimize inventory, and pull from demand. If you take a look at that and you compare those laws with the laws of nature, you have to look at what the objectives are, and to highlight the gap. If you look at what the lean objective is economic efficiency. the least in and the most out. Nature, it's basically got one kind of driving goal. To the ability that the planet can do it, it's saying let's take sunlight and try to support life as abundantly as possible. The scope in the operation is relatively limited. And of course, with the planet, it's 50,000 feet up and 30,000 feet down, and it's a globally, intimately tied ecosystem, non-tree hugger. This is just simply the way it is. Fossil fuels predominate. It's sunlight and geothermal. I put geothermal there because of the flutes in the bottom of the ocean, where some people are actually saying that that's maybe where life started. And there's a lot of life that operates down there using chemical processes that we don't use above sea level. The time scale is really important. It's seasons and millennia, whereas it's days, hours, and minutes for lean. And waste, you're converging to a minimum. And in nature, your idea is that waste is equal to food. Another way to look at it is if you look at the materials, it's basically customized materials, some toxic chemicals, and you can get in trouble when you do that. Nature has everything based on carbon, and the supply chain, the morality. Our lean systems are very human-centric, and basically nature is just trying to fill all possible niches, and also she operates with survival of the fittest. And there are global system webs in nature, and there's a narrow subsystem focus. So if you wanted to take something that's a really good practice that we have today, and a really good practice that seems to have taken millions and millions and millions of years to get there, and you compare them, I think you can see the differences pretty clearly, which is and that this gap right here between these two is very, very significant, and really is definitely going to require time to overcome. So one of the problems that we have is because of something like this, supply chain is global and local, it allows us to say, by the way, the Chinese are putting out as much, if not more, CO2 than us, but because we have a local focus, we don't take into account that the Chinese are putting out a lot of CO2 to supply us goods and wares as starting materials for assembly. So actually, there's a lot of the Chinese CO2 that's due to us. There's a lot of Mideast CO2 that's due to us. This isn't, by the way, I don't believe in guilt, pain, or threats as a motivating thing, and so I'm not trying to put guilt here. I'm just saying let's be rational about it, that we in fact have virtual water and virtual carbon dioxide in our products, and we need to do that. We need to do as much full accounting as we possibly can, doing supply chain analysis, lifetime analyses, to understand that. And one of the things I'd like to do in the Fowler Center as we staff and grow just a bit with the faculty is to begin to understand this issue of lifetime analyses and build a repertoire of these analyses that various companies can come to us and we can give them guidance. If you take a look at what happened, you're all familiar with being discreet when you enter the room and trying not to attract attention. If you're familiar with S-curves, you know that what really happens in an S-curve, you get a rapid growth and then eventually it tapers off and then something else comes in. If you take a look at what happens with companies that apply lean principles, every savings they get inside a factory results in a bottom line profit. You eliminate waste, you get an instant saving. But after a while, you've done the walls of the factory, then you have to go to the company, and then we start doing process improvements and things like that. We go to the supply chain, we apply the same rules to their factories and to their back offices, and finally we go to the suppliers, and then eventually you turn around and you say, what happens next? Where do I get my next savings? And really what you have to do then is to say, I need to go back and now redesign my product so that I can go up a new set of curves exactly in the same kind of way, but that when I redesign the product, I could move closer to the laws of nature. And over time, you can do this. I'm going to talk about companies both that have used time to their advantage and have used the laws of nature to their advantage in becoming successful. 100 years of evolution and production painting of cars. Henry Ford, and the story is well known, all the cars were black. What people don't realize is that black was the fastest curing color at the time that he was painting cars. And he was really very interested in it. Does anybody know how long it used to take to paint an automobile and to be finished so that it was in fact done? Anybody? 40 days. So when they were making the first cars, it took about 40 days. Now think of that as sales went up. No, you don't believe that? Unbelievable, isn't it? Okay. It took 40 days to paint a car. Now when I was at Ford, it was taking multiple hours, but there's a whole series of these little S-curves that happened along the way, and they had volatile organics, so they had very non-friendly operations, environmentally non-friendly. Does anyone know how long it takes to paint a car and have it done today? I called Dave Burdish to get the exact answer. It's less than 3 minutes.
And it's dry.
What?
It's dry in that.
It's done. And it's water-based.
Right. We make them.
Yeah, it's all done. So, by the way, Henry Ford didn't like the idea. What started him down this path was, as he got more and more production, he had to have more and more square feet under roof to keep drying. He couldn't stand the inventory. And so his first motive was, how do I get this inventory, this space? I can't afford it. So he had to eliminate waste in the factory. So it's a 99.7% reduction in the painting time of an automobile, but it took 100 years to do it. So for all kinds of reasons along the way, the automobile painting is an example of how you can keep reducing steadily, multi-generational. And the reason I like it is because it's multi-generational problem.
Well, that's an incremental approach in a sense, as opposed to a revolutionary one.
Yeah.
But in some areas, we've done revolutionary things where we just kind of rethought what we do totally.
Absolutely. But I wanted to give you something that I was familiar with a little bit, and I can go through the lacquers and all that kind of stuff, or electric cure, and the water base and the VOCs and all that, but I don't think that's what you want to hear. What I want to do is take that idea and then come back to this website, and if I can do this right, let's see. There's a website. Someone asked, what about this biomimicry stuff? I think one of the things I had asked you to do is to take a look at a website with Janine Banias. She was giving a talk at a TED conference. If you go to this website, and got the little hourglass. Uh-oh.
Sometimes it takes a while.
Takes a while. Oh, connecting. Anyway, if you go to this, you can ask nature any kind of question you want. Like, how do you paint a car? How does nature paint a car? How would a butterfly inspire your next design? I don't know what's going to come up on this website because it seems to change. But there's a little place here that has, if I can do this right, we had planned on coming in here at 8:30 this morning and practice this. So how would nature, so what would you like to ask? How would nature
Respond to
species diversity? I'll use paint. Paint a car. Okay? I didn't intend to do that because I thought I'd get something wild and stimulating from you guys, but maybe it's gone too long. Okay, so now we're in the mode. But anyway, what happens is she's created this, okay, there's one of the things is that nature car, an electric car, nature inspired. And these are the kinds of things that happen when you go to Ask Nature. I'm just looking for here's one. Lotus on paint. And basically what it says is the wings of many large winged insects such as butterflies and many and so forth. This is a product that comes from biomimicry. The wings and so forth. You can see this. I don't want to just spend time reading it, but they've created this website where you can ask how to shed water, how to waterproof, how to transport oxygen, and so forth. And when I was at Plug Power, we were doing fuel cells, and we had long conversations about membranes because in fuel cells, one of the critical components is a membrane. And trying to figure out how to get a membrane that would be porous to hydrogen or hydrogen ions and water. There's a lot of membrane examples in nature. We didn't get very far with it for a variety of reasons, but we were enlisting her help to do that. Okay, so that's just to show you that the website works. Is there any question about that? There's a hugely expanding array of information at the Biomimicry Guild that you can access through this Ask Nature website. Okay, so if I go, so nature as a designer, processing and storing information. When we begin to think about biology, we don't think about biology in terms of computers. And so I was asking, what's the computing power and what's the storage capacity of a disk, of a disk versus a seed, for example. And it's really interesting that the amount of information is literally tens to hundreds of thousand times greater that can be stored in a seed than can be stored in a diskette. And the computing power and speed is phenomenal. The energy consumption, 1 million times more energy efficient than a PC. 330 trillion operations per second in a DNA computer. And they've done work, and DNA computers are probably 50 to 75 years away, but the early work on it is already demonstrating that this is possible. And this is what nature does, and we still do it over on the mechanical side, but at least we know what we're looking for. We know what the output is, so we can begin to look now on the nature side to see what the input is. More practical things, there's a biomedical engineering group at Case Western that talks about the sea cucumber and the ability to implant electrodes in the human brain and not cause rejection or infection or in any kind of way interfere with the functioning. And it's based on the sea cucumber. There's bone-inspired bandages where you want to let, you want to let moisture in or air in and moisture out so it wicks off. And by looking at the way bones function, a group, again, at Biomedical Engineering at Case, have come up with bandage materials that work, that draw fluid away from the wounds while simultaneously allowing drugs to be administered. Same kind of thing along the Cuyahoga River, bulkheads, these large massive structures that could be metal or wood can be done by just modeling the behavior of trees. And in fact, I don't know what the state of this is right now, but I think it's in process of being implemented on the Cuyahoga because there's a narrow strip on the river that's channelized. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I don't know, Dave, if you.
I've been on the tour there. I came back to one, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's a lot though.
But anyway, so that's again using nature to help design a natural bulkhead. we were talking earlier about the timescales of what nature is doing, and we kind of forget how the planet goes together to construct the biosphere, that there's actually the interaction of biochemistry and biology based on chemistry and geology and laws of physics to create the biosphere. But inside, we have the hydrological cycle, which is the water cycle, water into the atmosphere, into the ocean, into the ground, back into the air, and so forth. There's the oxygen cycle, which is intimately, obviously, bound to vegetation, but can be interfered with in any number of ways. There's the sulfur cycle, there's the phosphorus cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. So what I was saying earlier about global warming, think about how difficult it would be to talk about one of these, particularly if you take a look, I want to take a look at something like the nitrogen cycle and what's involved in it, and try to say to somebody that this thing here, this cycle, we're interfering in some way that's threatening, that is threatening to us as human beings. And to me, what we're doing is we're beginning to interfere with ammonia, with oxides of nitrogen. Oxides of nitrogen are even much more powerful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. We have loss of soil nutrients because of the salts that form with calcium and potassium, the acidification of lakes and streams because of acids that have formed, nitric acid forms, and so forth. The eutrophication problems in the dead zones in the ocean and freshwater lakes like Lake Erie. Lake Erie, the eastern third of Lake Erie is basically dead from about mid-July till late September every year, and it's growing, and it's a big concern. So we are, in that very complicated cycle, tampering with something that's very, very threatening to us. It doesn't have to get very complicated till it's threatening to us. And what we're doing is we're burning fossil fuels. When you have automobiles, it took about 30 years to get the nitrogen level down to the right level in the exhaust. But when you have a high temperature, you create oxides of nitrogen, and automotive emission control devices have suppressed that. We obviously have the ammonia problem from human waste, and then deforestation. What it does is it leads to erosion and the loss of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And how does that affect us? Well, lots of ways. There are very complicated molecules in plastics. They break down, and they enter the fish cycle. We eat the fish. Then that causes defects, female reproductive health problems, and male sterility. Men today, for example, pretty well documented, are about 25% more sterile, I don't know exactly how you say it, less fertile than less than 100 years ago. And it's all because of a bunch of things that are going on. Now see how, and I've done this intentionally, see how complicated this gets compared to something that's called global warming. But every one of those cycles that I put up there, sulfur, phosphorus, has a story that comes back to bother us. And we need to see that as a reality, not as a disabling threat so that we're immobilized. So,
Shouldn't that give you a balancing loop somewhere though in the picture?
which one?
Reduction of fertility?
Well, it does, because what happens is, what the balancing loop is, that people go to fertility clinics, and then they artificially do things, and they borrow Fred's stuff for Tom and whatever, you know?
But Alan's point, I think, is a serious point. In a sense, Malthus was predicting all of this.
Mhm.
And I'm reminded of the chain between wolves and caribou in Alaska. And you could teach the wolves to make better use of caribou carcasses, and you could teach them maybe eat some tundra plants and so forth, and you could increase the number of wolves, but you're not fixing the basic problem. And in a sense, it's the basic
Yeah, well, I skipped over the population issue, and I'll do it again, but just understand that what we have is an unsustainable growth, and whatever happens, it's more than likely going to be a catastrophic drop-off. So what we need to do is learn as much as we can now, so when we're in the recovery period as a species, that we have a lot more information to rebuild than we did before. By the way, there's a pretty well-known geneticist in Australia that says that men will be sterile in less than 25,000 years. Not that anybody here needs to worry about that, but it's still, you know, it's happening, and it's measurable, and it can be understood. It has to do with the Y chromosome, I think. What we want to do is we want to adopt a design attitude, and a design attitude will change our practices, what materials we use, what type technologies we apply, and eventually, and hopefully, maybe before, that we'll begin to change cultures and different values. So we'll end up looking at our paradigms and really seeing them clearly, and we'll see and both, and not be so quick to dismiss our Chon. And one of the ways to do that and to speculate, it's impractical because people don't like to do it, but if you can just sit back and begin to think about what it would be like, or what would you like to have in 150 years, you can actually move away from paradigms and all kinds of constraints. And you can imagine what's truly desired. Remember I said, where do you want to go and where are you? And you can then have a North Star or an anchor point for your key decisions. So as you move across design to design, you can actually have a multi-generational vision that carries over. In this business of subording ego to goal, you don't necessarily have to be there for the payoff. And it's the seventh generation kind of idea, which is roughly 140 years if a generation is 20 years. So I'm just suggesting that wherever you are in your lives and whatever your social network is for enterprise, and that's NGO and for-profits and so forth in my mind, it might be good to just to sit back and say, you know, what would we want as a people in this entity in 150 years? And it's not so far-fetched.
Do you know humans who actually do that? Seriously?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, when they get their mutual fund statement and it's below an average return, what do? They get pissed off and get rid of their broker. So while they're designing how other people should be managing their lives for 150 years and their generations, when their investments don't perform, I'm talking like 25 years financial services, their investments perform below average, they get all annoyed. And so that putting the very same pressures on the economy that caused all these issues where people thought that with a little bit of money, they'll be able to get incredible returns and be able to retire on 20 grand, and that's gonna make something for them in the future, and they think their house will go up forever. So does this thinking, and these very same people then turn around, I'll guarantee you, a lot of the people here, maybe even yourself, if you get a bad statement, and it's 2 bad statements, and 3 bad statements, are you gonna stop and say, well, you know what, I'm not profit oriented, I don't want this to get better. You put pressure on the system by selling it and moving on to something else. And a lot of problems stem from this basic thing of human nature, which is instant gratification versus deferred gratification. And I don't see how you can fight that. I just don't see how I just don't see how that is fightable, because people say it, they don't do it. It's like food. Everybody should be healthy. Go to McDonald's, there's huge lines.
Sure.
I don't know what your solution is. Really is also true, but what is the solution?
Well, I think that you're really doing a good job of defining the problem in the sense of what makes people have the need for instant gratification, number one. Number two,
We're made like that.
well, we're not necessarily made like that, but that's okay. But we need to explore that. I think that that's a good thing to explore. Okay. But, you know, reducing it to what happens in 1 year or one lifetime is only part of it. what I'm asking for is for people, if they kind of know where we need to go, that there's a little more bias. And this isn't like turning a switch and saying I'm going to live a 150-year existence. I mean, that I'm going to live now in that future. It just simply says that I'm going to make choices that are, someone used the word earlier, incremental change, that generation by generation, there's an incremental change. There's a guy whose company I'm going to get wrong. His name is Anders Ferguson, and you can look him up in Google. Anders Ferguson, and he's founded a fund on exactly the kind of principles that he thinks that just move the needle some. And he actually did pretty well during the downturn. So it might be worthwhile to see what his fund is. They've only got like $750 million in that fund, so it's not a big fund. But there are people that are practicing that incremental. It's like in a boat. It's like a little bit of tacking that's required. It's not the whole thing. And that's one of the things you get out of an exercise like that. Yes?
I was just thinking for the last hour, and sort of triggered by Drew's comment about changing the lens from less tree hugging to more business. And I think Jeff's somewhat dramatic comment that this is about Jeff Ingram's job. It's somewhat true, but not totally so. And then Ray Masters kind of sparked this. There's one factor we've not talked about, which is Wall Street. Because Wall Street is asking for short-term returns. They would punish Jeff, they would punish GE if they're lifting up the Hudson. I think that's why it's not taken. So I don't see how this would work until and unless perhaps Wall Street is educated to look for long-term returns. So
Wall Street is us.
Yeah.
right.
That's what we have to remember. We're the ones driving, and they will provide.
I understand, Rick.
Whatever
But
you want.
how can it's not a challenge, it's really a question.
No, but that's the
How can
reality.
individuals change Wall Street's mindset? That's sort of a very bottoms up, millions of individuals saying, we'll go more green, more eco. I'm struggling with that externality where it's us, and actually this was your comment that sparked what I'm saying. How can individuals reshape Wall Street's long-run, short-run focus?
Yeah, but I think there's two answers. No, one is what David was alluding to with Walmart, where they look at elimination of waste, so they go in and say, oh, if I change the packaging of this product, right, I save money in shipping, I save money in the product, and by the way, I save, consuming forests.
Yeah.
Right? So we can make things where it's, it wins economically and it's useful. You do it.
Yes.
The only other way you do it is with regulation. You somehow force you punish companies to pollute or whatever, right? I mean, because there's going to be some cases where it isn't cheaper to do this, right? The cheaper way is to use chemicals or whatever.
And the first approach which you commented on is probably more incremental. The second one, if it's done right, might be a bigger jump.
Right. You say, oh, we're going to implement cap and trade because we want to make explicit the cost of carbon, right, as opposed to deferred. Then that will influence the market. But that's not but you do that through a governmental process, not through some of the people saying, oh, I want cap and trade, it's all buy cap and trade stocks, and that doesn't make any sense, right?
Let me just quickly add, I think Ray's point is missed, largely missed. You have to understand, Case Western's endowment is Wall Street. All of you guys are Wall Street. Anybody who has a Ford pension or is involved in Ford pension is Wall Street. So it's not Lehman, just to pick something out of the air. It's generally contributed all problems. It's everybody does. It's not Wall Street, it's everybody. And like Ray said, when you get your statement, if you look at your two colleagues and you all have $1 million, you now have 300,000, and your two colleagues on each side have 1.4.
Yeah.
You're not going to say, I'll be patient and wait.
But at least they know where the money went.
Yeah.
I'll see you to cash it out at lunch.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good comment. If I could come back to why I'm very interested in K through 12 education, business school education, it's about beginning to change the system. It's a long process, and we accept that paradigm of the need for the quarter or the need for the instant gratification And I'm saying that there's a possibility of other paradigms. Yes.
The greatest teacher, and he is the teacher at this stage of his life, is Warren Buffett. He's there. You can read everything he's ever written. Everybody says, wow, he's such a smart guy, amazing, and then called a traitor. You know, so the K through 12, probably that's the answer. Look what they're eating in schools. Never mind teaching them about long-term thinking. This is a...
The question is whether they can read or not to begin with.
Yeah, but even beyond that, as opposed to having potato chips and pizza for breakfast. I mean, this is a... You're fighting the tsunami.
I had an ice cream sandwich for breakfast.
Huh?
I had an ice cream sandwich for breakfast.
Yeah,
I'm just saying I'm in that boat. Yeah.
well, no, but in a way, it sort of supports this. Is this tsunami of behaviors so reflective of who we are?
Right. And
We're,
I'm just,
we've evolved to be short-term thinkers. The caveman didn't care about, and the saber-tooth care about, you know, it was like, if I survive another day, I'm okay.
ignorant of the consequences. He was ignorant of the consequences. I'm just saying that to change the paradigms, I got a slide that I want to end with that'll come back to your question because that is important. Yes, John.
I think one of the core issues that's running through this, or core distinctions, is the difference between efficiency and resilience. And everything that we do as human beings tends to lean much more toward the efficiency. We want the most efficient solution, the one single best way to get the most from the least. And that's almost in direct opposition to what nature does. If you look at the webs in nature, they are filled with redundancies, which are inherently inefficient, but extremely resilient. And the distinction between those two, even when we start talking about using a design approach, the design approach is still generally a linear thinking pattern about trying to make an efficient design, what's most efficient. And anything that starts or is predicated on efficiency first is destined to fail in any sort of sustainability mindset. Because if it's 100% efficient, all it takes is one thing to go wrong and the whole system fails.
Right.
And we see that happen over and over again, whether it's with finances or with global climate or different things. It doesn't matter. Because the drive for efficiency in T accounting, there's no T account in nature. There's no check and balance that someone's keeping track of. Well, we put one in this column, we have to put one in another column. Because it's not a linear relationship.
No, I agree with you completely.
So what do we do?
Okay. Well, first of all, we have conversations like this. I mean, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I don't think I could be here having this conversation.
You remember the Club of Rome?
Yes.
And they were predicting the end of the world, overpopulous Malthusian thing again. And that, so I remember a future shock, Alvin Toffler.
Absolutely.
And a lot of things didn't...
Yeah, and all I'm saying is whether they had the time constant right, there's a thing called peak oil, and it never seems to get here. But it was, at one time we had peak oil in the United States. I think that it's difficult to predict with any kind of exactitude because, again, you don't know the resiliency of us to find some technological solution. But I think there's some fundamental biospheric systems that we're tampering with that we need to understand better than we do. I won't go there. I think all I'll do is I'll go to this. By the way, there's
question about
references. Yeah.
So I've read some about, you see the coral reef coral reefs are dying, and I've read some things, and you may know about this, in the oceans, the bigger problem with CO2 is actually the acidification of oceans, and there's concerns of just killing our oceans.
Well, that's true.
Was that part of the nitrogen cycle here, or is this?
No, that's actually the CO2 cycle, and what's happening is CO2 is going into the oceans, it's slightly changing the pH, and the acidity, because of carbonic acid, is dissolving the microorganisms that have shells that rely on the ocean being a little more basic than it is. And so as they're dying, that's also one of the things that's causing the corals to die as well.
So, I mean, my conclusion is we're doing a lot of chemistry experiments out there. chemistry, biology experiments, and this article in Time said that actually where the chemicals are ending up is in our blood, that you can measure that in your mother's milk. So that, we're doing a big experiment on ourselves
Sure.
as well.
The only problem is it's not a controlled experiment, and we don't have a base case. We're losing the base at the same time, but you're right.
We have the ability to measure things today we couldn't before.
Absolutely.
So now we know these invisible
Right.
things are happening, whereas before we had no clue.
So I want to end with 2 slides. Donella Meadows has, who was actually one of the writers of the Club of Rome, by the way, so we can automatically discredit her if we want to. But she's deceased, so I mean, we should cut her a break. 12 leverage points, and these are the final 2. They start, you know, like the countdown, 10, 9, 8, whatever. The bottom 2, the mindset or paradigms. If you want to interfere in a system, you need to understand the mindset or paradigms out of which the system, its goals, structures, rules, delays, parameters arise. You need to be able to see whether it's a rabbit or a duck. And only then, if you see it, can you embark on an effort to transcend those paradigms and invent new ones. So Donella Meadows, this is pretty well explained in a lot of her writings. And actually, the institute that she founded, which is the Sustainability Institute in Vermont, is a pretty thoughtful place to go. The 12th, the lowest leverage one, just for reference, is, I think it's regulations. So when she talks about a system, that's 12th, and then there's a bunch between it. You can look them up. Okay. Is anybody interested in knowing what Chon stands for?
Yeah.
Is this a word that anybody is concerned about? You know what it is?
Well, send it to that.
You did? What is it?
Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to do is say we need to find our Chon. We need to find and understand what we're made of and how that relates to the biosphere. Cheater. No, that's good.
Sufficient.
That's right. Yes, there was a question. Oh, okay, good. So 2, by the way, I've given talks at Harvard and MIT, and after a while I've learned, close your laptops. Because if I say 387, they'll look it up and it's 389. And I get this hand waving stuff, you know. So thank you very much for sparing me.